The morning after my husband's funeral, I logged into our joint bank account to pay the florist. The balance read $12.43. I stared at the screen, convinced the banking app had frozen. I refreshed it. $12.43. Again, $12.43. Outside, the October rain fell softly over Bellevue, Washington. The same rain David loved because it made the maple trees in our backyard glow orange and red. His coffee mug still sat in the sink. His reading glasses rested on the arm of his favorite recliner. His jacket was hanging by the front door exactly where he'd left it before going to work 5 days earlier. Everything in the house looked as though my husband would walk back in at any moment, except he never would. David Morgan died from a massive heart attack at 53. 1 minute, he was driving to his accounting office. The next, a state trooper was standing on my porch asking if I was Emily Morgan. 26 years of marriage had ended with a knock on the door. I looked back at the banking app. The transaction history showed something I couldn't understand. At 3:14 p.m. yesterday, just 2 hours after David's funeral, every dollar from our checking account, savings account, and investment account had been transferred into something called the Morgan Family Trust. I frowned. We didn't have a family trust. At least, I didn't think we did. Before I could think any further, my phone rang. Brian Morgan, David's younger brother. I answered immediately. Emily. His voice sounded strangely calm. I was just about to call you. I'm looking at our bank account. Oh, that single word made my stomach tighten. Brian, where did our money go? It's safe. Where? In the family trust. What family trust? The one David created. I stood so quickly my chair slid backward across the kitchen floor. We never had a trust. I assumed he told you. He told me everything. Finally, I'll explain when I get there. Brian arrived 40 minutes later wearing a dark gray suit, the same one he'd worn at the funeral. For years, people joked that he and David looked like twins. They were wrong. David smiled with his eyes. Brian never smiled unless someone was watching. He carried a leather briefcase into my kitchen and carefully placed it on the table. I know you're upset. You think? He ignored my tone and removed several neatly organized documents. The trust paperwork. I grabbed the first page. Morgan Family Trust. Created 18 months earlier. Trustee, Brian Morgan. Beneficiary, Brian Morgan. I read it twice, then a third time. My name wasn't there. Not once. This has to be wrong. It isn't. Our savings belong to both of us. David changed his estate plan. Without telling me, he didn't want you worrying about finances. I looked at him in disbelief. 26 years of marriage, and he secretly gave everything to you? Brian folded his hands. It wasn't personal. I laughed. A short, bitter laugh. Not personal. He wanted the Morgan assets to stay in the Morgan family. I am his family. Brian's expression barely changed. You were his wife. The past tense hit harder than I expected. I stared at him. I want you to leave. Emily. Leave! He slowly gathered his papers. Before reaching the door, he turned back toward me. If you hire a lawyer, you'll only waste your money. The front door closed quietly behind him. For several minutes, I didn't move. The refrigerator hummed. Rain tapped against the windows. The silence felt louder than anything I'd ever heard. The following morning, I drove to Evergreen Community Bank. The branch manager, Susan Whitaker, greeted me with sympathetic eyes. Mrs. Morgan, I'm very sorry for your loss. Thank you. I need help understanding something. She invited me into her office. After verifying my identification, she opened my account records. Her expression slowly changed. You weren't present for yesterday's transfer? No, I didn't authorize anything. Susan looked back at the screen. The paperwork indicates otherwise. My heart skipped. What paperwork? She hesitated. There was an in-person authorization. In person? She nodded. Yesterday afternoon. I was at my husband's funeral. Her fingers froze over the keyboard. I'm sorry. I leaned forward. Who signed the documents? I'm not allowed to discuss another customer's information. Another customer. The words echoed in my mind. Someone else had been treated as the owner of my life. That evening, I searched every filing cabinet in our house. David kept everything. Tax returns, insurance papers, mortgage documents, investment statements. Every folder was perfectly labeled, but there was no trust, no mention of Brian, no estate changes, nothing. Around 10 o'clock, I climbed into the attic. Near the back wall sat a small black fireproof box I'd completely forgotten about. Inside were our passports, marriage certificate, and a sealed white envelope. Across the front, in David's handwriting, were 2 words, for Emily. My hands trembled. I carefully opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. The date caught my attention immediately. 6 months earlier. I unfolded the paper. My dearest Em, if you're reading this, something has gone terribly wrong. My breathing stopped. I need you to believe me. I never never moved our money. I never intended to leave you with nothing. If anyone tells you otherwise, they're lying. Brian has been pressuring me for almost a year. He wants control of the family investments. I refused every time. If anything happens to me unexpectedly, don't trust anyone who asks you to sign papers. Everything you need is inside my safety deposit box at Evergreen Community Bank. Promise me you'll find it. I love you more than every dollar we ever saved. Always, David. I lowered the letter onto the table. My husband hadn't abandoned me. He had tried to warn me, which meant only one thing. Someone had stolen our money. And somehow, they had convinced the bank that David wanted it to happen. As I reached for my phone to call a lawyer, it buzzed first. An unknown number. I answered. A calm female voice spoke. Mrs. Morgan? Yes? My name is Rachel Bennett. I'm a probate attorney. I know. I believe someone asked my office to prepare documents for your husband's estate. Hope flickered inside me. And? I refused. My heart pounded. Why? Because the man claiming to represent David Morgan couldn't answer basic questions about your marriage. I gripped the phone tighter. Who was it? Rachel took a slow breath. It was your brother-in-law, Brian. For the first time since David died, I realized this wasn't just a fight over money. It was the beginning of something much darker. I didn't sleep. The letter stayed on my kitchen table all night. If you're reading this, something has gone terribly wrong. I must have read those words 100 times. David wasn't the kind of man who wrote dramatic letters. He balanced our checkbook to the penny, labeled every storage box in the attic, and never forgot an anniversary. If he wrote that letter, he had a reason. At 6 the next morning, I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and unfolded the rest of the letter. My dearest M, if you're reading this, I wasn't able to tell you everything in person. I have never hidden money from you. I have never planned to leave you with nothing. If anyone tells you otherwise, don't believe them. Brian has been pressuring me for months. He wants me to transfer our investments into a family trust that he controls. I refused every time. If anything changes after I'm gone, don't sign a single document until you've spoken to a lawyer. There's something important inside my safety deposit box at Evergreen Community Bank. If I can't tell you myself, that's where you'll find the truth. I love you. Always, David. I lowered the letter and wiped away my tears. Safety deposit box. David had never mentioned having one. Then I remembered something he had said almost a year earlier while organizing old family documents. Some things are safer in a bank than they are in a house. At the time, I thought he meant photographs. Now I realized he had meant something much more important. By 10 that morning, I was back at Evergreen Community Bank. The branch manager, Susan Whitaker, recognized me immediately. Mrs. Morgan, I'm very sorry for your loss. Thank you. My husband rented a safety deposit box here. I'd like to access it. Susan typed for a few moments before her expression changed. I'm sorry. I can't allow access. Why not? According to our records, ownership was transferred last week. My stomach dropped. Transferred to who? She hesitated. Brian Morgan. I stared at her. Last week? David was in the hospital last week. He was admitted with chest pain 3 days before he died. Susan looked back at her computer, then at me. She suddenly looked uncomfortable. Neither of us said what we were both thinking. If David was in the hospital, who came to the bank? I walked back to my car, feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. Before leaving the parking lot, I searched online for an estate attorney and called Rachel Bennett, the woman who had phoned me the night before. She agreed to meet me that afternoon. Rachel's office overlooked Lake Washington. She carefully read David's letter before placing it back on her desk. Emily, this changes everything. How? Because this letter proves your husband never intended to leave you with nothing. If someone transferred those assets, we need to determine whether David actually signed those documents. You think they were forged? I think we shouldn't assume anything until we see the evidence. She opened a legal notebook. We'll request copies of every document, every signature, and every piece of security footage from the bank. Do you really think they'll give it to us? If they don't, a judge can make them. For the first time since David died, I felt a little hope. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Brian. Emily, what do you want? I heard you've hired a lawyer. That's right. You're making a mistake. No, someone already made one. David trusted me. I looked at the letter lying beside me. No, Brian, he didn't. What do you mean? He warned me about you. Then he quietly asked, he left you a letter? I smiled without realizing it. You didn't know that, did you? Brian immediately hung up. Rachel called me the next morning. Good news. Please tell me we finally have some. The bank has agreed to preserve all security camera footage from the week before David's death. I closed my eyes in relief. So it still exists? Yes. They normally erase recordings after 30 days, but we requested preservation just in time. Cameras don't forget. They don't care about lies or family loyalty. cruelty. They simply record the truth. 3 days later, Rachel invited me back to her office. She laid several documents across the conference table. These are the trust papers Brian submitted. I studied David's signature carefully. It looked almost perfect. Almost. Something's wrong. Rachel nodded. The capital D. I looked closer. David always wrote a large looping D at the beginning of his signature. The one on the trust documents was smaller and awkward, almost as if someone had copied it while looking at another document. Rachel placed David's driver's license beside it, then his passport, then our mortgage paperwork. Every genuine signature matched. The trust document didn't. I've already hired a forensic handwriting examiner, Rachel said. Before I could answer, her assistant knocked on the office door. Rachel, there's someone here to see you. A tall man carrying a sealed envelope stepped inside. My name is Daniel Harris. I'm an internal fraud investigator hired by Evergreen Community Bank. How can we help you? Daniel placed the envelope on the table. I believe someone inside the bank helped steal your husband's estate. He opened the envelope and removed a security camera photograph. My heart began pounding. The grainy image clearly showed Brian Morgan standing inside the bank's private vault hallway. Beside him stood a senior bank employee unlocking the restricted security door. The timestamp at the bottom of the image read 3 days before David died. Rachel slowly looked up at Daniel. Who is the employee? That's exactly what we're trying to find out. And I don't think Brian acted alone. I couldn't stop staring at the security camera photograph. Brian stood calmly beside a bank employee outside the private vault, smiling as if he belonged there. David was in the hospital that same afternoon. He couldn't possibly have been at the bank. Rachel slid the photograph into a folder. This changes our strategy. Daniel Harris nodded. The bank has opened an internal fraud investigation. Someone with employee access bypassed standard verification procedures. Can you identify the employee? I asked. Daniel hesitated. Not yet. The camera angle doesn't clearly show her face, but we know she used her employee keycard to enter the vault. Rachel leaned forward. Can we obtain the full video? We're working on it. Someone attempted to delete the recording yesterday. My heart skipped. Delete it? Fortunately, our security system automatically creates backup copies every night. Rachel smiled for the first time in days. Whoever did this didn't know that. 3 days later, the forensic handwriting report arrived. Rachel called me into her office immediately. Sit down, she said. I knew from her expression that something important had happened. She handed me the report. The conclusion was highlighted in yellow. The signature attributed to David Morgan is not authentic. It is a simulated forgery created by copying known examples of his handwriting. I read the sentence twice. So he never signed the trust? Rachel slowly shook her head. According to this expert, no. Tears filled my eyes. David hadn't betrayed me. He had been telling the truth all along. Rachel placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. Now we need to prove who forged it. The following afternoon, Daniel called. Emily, we've opened David's safety deposit box. I froze. You have? The court approved emergency access because of the fraud investigation. Was there anything inside? Daniel was quiet for a moment. You should come here. Less than an hour later, I sat inside a private conference room at the bank. A small metal box rested on the table. Daniel carefully placed its contents in front of me. There were old family photographs, our original marriage certificate, several stock certificates, and a sealed manila envelope. Across the front, in David's handwriting, were the words, "If anything happens to me before I can stop Brian." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a flash drive and another handwritten letter. Rachel read over my shoulder. Emily, if you're holding this, Brian didn't give up. 6 months ago, he asked me to transfer all of our investments into a trust that he controlled. When I refused, he became angry. He said I owed him because our father left the family business to me instead of him. I told him our savings belonged to you and me, not him. After that conversation, I started recording every meeting we had. Everything is on this flash drive. If you're reading this, please give it to the police. My heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe. Rachel looked at Daniel. Do you have a laptop? He nodded. We plugged in the flash drive. Several audio files appeared on the screen. Rachel clicked the first recording. David's voice filled the room. Brian, this conversation is over. Brian answered immediately. You'll regret saying no. The money belongs to Emily and me, not after you're gone. The room fell completely silent. Rachel slowly paused the recording. Daniel looked pale. There's more. We listened to the next file. Brian laughed quietly. You think she'll ever question legal documents? Emily trusts everyone. That's always been her weakness. I covered my mouth with both hands. Rachel reached for the final recording. This this one was only 30 seconds long. David sounded tired. If anything happens to me unexpectedly, Brian should be investigated first. The recording ended. No one spoke for several moments. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. I'm taking copies of these directly to the police. Rachel nodded. And we're filing for an emergency injunction, freezing every asset in the Morgan family trust. For the first time since David's funeral, I felt something stronger than grief. I felt hope. 2 days later, Brian appeared at my front door without calling. He looked nervous for the first time in his life. Emily, we need to talk. I stayed inside and left the chain on the door. About what? You've misunderstood everything. I almost laughed. Really? David wanted me to protect the family money. Funny. I held up a copy of the forensic report. Because this says he never signed your trust documents. Brian's face lost its color. Then I held up another sheet of paper. And this says your fingerprints are all over his safety deposit box. His eyes widened. Finally, I spoke the words I'd been waiting days to say. The police have the recordings, Brian. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he turned around, walked quickly to his car, and drove away without another word. Watching him disappear down the street, I realized something important. Guilty people don't argue when the truth catches them. They run. And Brian Morgan had just started running. Brian disappeared for nearly a week. His phone went straight to voicemail. His lawyer refused to answer Rachel's questions. The police searched his home, his office, and every financial record connected to the Morgan family trust. Then, on a cold Monday morning, Detective Lisa Hernandez called. Emily? Yes? We've arrested Brian Morgan. I closed my eyes. Not because I felt happy, because I finally felt like I could breathe. What happened? He tried to withdraw nearly $200,000 from the trust before the court could freeze the accounts. So he knew. He knew we were closing in. 3 months later, the courtroom was packed. Brian sat beside his attorney, looking nothing like the confident man who had walked into my kitchen after David's funeral. The bank employee who had helped him, Karen Mitchell, had already accepted a plea agreement. She admitted Brian had promised her $50,000 if she processed forged estate documents and ignored the bank's verification rules. Rachel stood beside me. You ready? I nodded. As ready as I'll ever be. The judge entered and the trial began. The forensic handwriting expert testified first. The signatures on the trust documents are not authentic. Next came Daniel Harris from the bank. Then the prosecutor played David's recordings. The courtroom fell silent. Brian's own voice echoed through the speakers. You'll regret saying no. The money won't belong to Emily after you're gone. No one looked at Brian. No one needed to. His own words had already convicted him. When it was Brian's turn to testify, he tried to explain. I never meant to hurt Emily. The prosecutor walked closer. Then why did you hide the transfer from her? I was protecting family assets. You made yourself the only beneficiary. Brian said nothing. The prosecutor held up David's handwritten letter. Was David lying? No. Were these recordings fake? No. Did you forge your brother's signature? Brian looked down at the table. For nearly 20 seconds, the courtroom was completely silent. Then, barely above a whisper, he answered, yes. A gasp spread through the gallery. I felt tears running down my face, not because he confessed, because David had been telling the truth all along. The judge found Brian guilty of fraud, forgery, theft, and financial exploitation of an estate. Karen Mitchell lost her banking license and received a prison sentence for her role in the scheme. The court ordered every remaining dollar in the Morgan family trust returned to me, along with interest. The bank also reached a confidential settlement for failing to protect our accounts. For the first time in months, I wasn't worried about paying the mortgage, but the money wasn't what mattered. My husband's name had been cleared. A few weeks later, I visited David's grave. The cemetery overlooked Lake Washington, one of his favorite places. I brought fresh white lilies, his favorite flowers. I did it, I whispered. They know the truth now. The wind rustled through the trees. For a long time, I simply sat there. Then I remembered something Daniel had said after the trial. Your husband planned for almost everything. At the time, I hadn't understood what he meant until Rachel called later that afternoon. Emily, I found one last document. What is it? It wasn't in the trust file. It was inside David's personal attorney's records. She handed me a sealed envelope. Across the front, in David's handwriting, were the words, "Open after justice is served." I smiled through my tears. Inside was one final letter. My dearest M, if you're reading this, then you won. I always believed you would. If Brian went as far as I feared, I knew you'd never stop searching for the truth. Please don't spend the rest of your life thinking about what he stole. Think about what we built together. The memories were always worth more than the money. Travel like we always planned. Plant the roses we kept talking about. And whenever it rains, make yourself a cup of coffee and remember that somewhere, somehow, I'm still loving you. Always, David. I cried harder than I had at his funeral. Not because I was saying goodbye, but because I finally understood. Love isn't measured by what someone leaves behind. It's measured by how hard they fight to protect you, even when they know they may not be there. The following spring, I planted 12 white rose bushes along the backyard fence, one for every 2 years of our marriage. On quiet evenings, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, listening to the rain David loved so much. People often ask if I hated Brian. The answer surprised them. I didn't. Hatred would have kept me tied to the worst chapter of my life. Justice allowed me to close it. Sometimes winning doesn't mean getting even. Sometimes winning means refusing to let someone else's greed define the rest of your story. The money came back. My husband's good name was restored. And the man who tried to steal both lost everything he thought he had gained. In the end, the empty bank account wasn't the greatest loss I suffered. It was the reason the truth finally came to light. And that truth gave me something worth far more than money. It gave me peace.